Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'd been babysitting for about 2 years when the Andersons called me that Friday in October. 17 years old, trying to save every dollar I could for college, and honestly, I jumped at any opportunity to make some cash. Their place was huge, one of those old colonial houses with dark wood everywhere, and rooms that seemed to go on forever. Mr. Anderson worked at some investment firm downtown, while Mrs. Anderson did real estate, and they needed someone to watch Oliver and Mia while they went to a charity gala. Oliver was 8, really into dinosaurs and Legos, while Mia had just turned 6 and carried this raggedy stuffed rabbit everywhere she went. They seemed like good kids when I'd met them briefly the week before, quiet but friendly enough. The parents left around 4 that afternoon, said they'd be back by midnight, left me $60 on the counter for pizza, and told me to help myself to anything in the fridge. I figured it would be an easy night, feed the kids, maybe watch a Disney movie, get them in bed by 8:30, then catch up on my calculus homework. Everything went perfectly normal for the first few hours, which makes what happened later even harder to process. We built a massive Lego castle in the living room, ordered pepperoni pizza from this place called Gino's down the street, and the kids were actually being really sweet with each other, taking turns picking what to watch on TV. Around 7, we were cleaning up the dishes together when Mia said something that made every muscle in my body go tense. She was drying a plate with this faded dish towel, humming some tune from a cartoon, when she mentioned really casually that the man in the attic doesn't like pepperoni either. Oliver dropped the cup he was holding. It was plastic, thankfully, and his face went white as paper. He grabbed his sister's arm, not hard but firm, and told her to stop making stuff up. But the way he said it, the panic in his voice, told me he wasn't correcting her for lying. He was scared she'd said something she shouldn't have, and when I asked what she meant, both kids exchanged this look that made all the hair on my arms stand straight up. I tried to keep my voice light and asked them who they were talking about, maybe thinking it was some game they played or a story someone told them at school. Oliver immediately said nobody, and started putting dishes away really fast, but Mia, being 6 and not understanding whatever secret her brother was keeping, kept going. She said the man had been there for a while, that sometimes she could hear him walking around up there at night, and that Oliver had seen him too, but told her never to tell Mom and Dad, because they wouldn't believe them anyway. The attic access was in the hallway just outside the kids' bedrooms, one of those pull-down doors with a string hanging from it, and I'd noticed it earlier but hadn't thought much about it. Oliver was practically dragging Mia out of the kitchen at this point, saying she was making things up for attention, but the kid looked genuinely terrified, like he might actually start crying. That's when I heard it, this really distinct creaking sound from directly above us, like someone taking a careful step on old floorboards. We all went silent for probably 10 seconds, just standing there in the kitchen listening to the house. Old houses make noise, I kept telling myself. Wood settles, pipes expand and contract. There's always some logical explanation for these sounds. But then it happened again. Another creak, then another, in a clear pattern like someone was walking slowly across the floor above us. Oliver grabbed his sister's hand and whispered that they should go watch TV in the living room, but I could see he was shaking. Mia seemed less scared and more confused, like she couldn't understand why we were all acting weird about something she'd apparently been aware of for who knows how long. Told the kids to go to the living room and pick out a movie, trying to sound normal, even though my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Once they were gone, I stood there in that kitchen, looking up at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. The Andersons had probably just stored some boxes up there that were settling, or maybe they had mice. Lots of old houses have mice in the walls and attics. I went to check on the kids in the living room and found them huddled together on the couch, Oliver with his arm around Mia protectively, while she clutched her stuffed rabbit. They'd put on some cartoon, but neither was really watching it. Both of them kept looking toward the hallway that led to their bedrooms and the attic access. I sat down with them and tried to act normal, but after about 15 minutes I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to know what was going on. I asked Oliver, as gently as I could, to tell me the truth about what Mia had said. At first he refused, kept insisting she was making it up, but when I promised I wouldn't think he was lying or crazy, he finally broke down. He said it started about 3 weeks ago when he woke up one night to use the bathroom and saw the attic door was open just a crack. He knew his parents never went up there. His mom had bad knees and his dad always said there was nothing up there but insulation and old junk from the previous owners. But that night, Oliver swore he saw fingers wrapped around the edge of the door, holding it open just slightly, and then the door had slowly, silently pulled shut. After that night, Oliver said he started noticing things. Food would go missing from the pantry, not a lot, but enough that he noticed because his mom had blamed him for eating a whole box of crackers he hadn't touched. Sometimes he'd hear footsteps above his room late at night, really soft ones like someone trying not to be heard. The worst part was about a week ago when he'd gotten up to get water and saw a shadow at the end of the hallway, just standing there by the attic access. He'd run back to his room and locked the door, and the next morning tried to tell his dad, but Mr. Anderson had said he was having nightmares from watching scary YouTube videos and took away his tablet for a week. Mia had apparently heard the footsteps too, but being younger, just accepted it as something normal. Oliver had told her it was probably just house sounds to keep her from getting scared, but she'd started calling it the man in the attic anyway. As Oliver was telling me all this, I kept listening for more sounds from above, and that's when I noticed something that made my whole body go cold. There was a thin line of dust on the hallway floor, right beneath the attic door, like someone had recently disturbed years of accumulated dirt, and it had filtered down through the cracks. I pulled out my phone and almost called the Andersons right then, but I stopped myself. What was I going to say? That their kids had told me a story about someone in the attic and I'd heard some creaking? They'd think I was either trying to scare them or that I was too immature to handle babysitting. Instead, I called my older brother Nathan, who was home from college for the weekend. He answered on the third ring and I could hear his video game in the background. I told him everything as quietly as I could while the kids watched their movie, and at first he laughed, said I was letting my imagination run wild. But when I mentioned the dust and the missing food, he got quiet and told me to grab the kids and leave the house immediately. He said he'd meet me outside in 15 minutes. He only lived about 10 minutes away, and we could figure out what to do from there. I was about to do exactly that when we heard something that changed everything. The clear, unmistakable sound of a toilet flushing from the second-floor bathroom, right next to the kids' bedrooms. The thing is, we were all in the living room on the first floor, and I knew for a fact that the Andersons didn't have any pets that could somehow trigger a flush. Oliver's face went completely white, and Mia actually started crying, burying her face in her rabbit. I grabbed both kids and my car keys, not even bothering with their jackets or my backpack, and we rushed toward the front door. But as we passed the staircase, I made the mistake of looking up toward the second floor. Standing at the top of the stairs was a man, probably in his 40s, wearing what looked like old sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, with greasy shoulder-length hair and this scraggly beard. He wasn't moving, just standing there watching us with these hollow, sunken eyes. The smell hit me then, too. Even from downstairs I could smell it, like unwashed clothes and spoiled food and something else I couldn't identify. For what felt like forever but was probably only 2 seconds, we just stared at each other. And then he took one step down the stairs, his bare foot making this wet slapping sound on the wood. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I yanked the front door open so hard it slammed against the wall, and we ran out into the dark October evening. Oliver was practically carrying Mia, who was sobbing uncontrollably, and I was fumbling with my car keys, dropping them twice on the driveway before managing to unlock my beat-up Toyota Corolla. We piled into the car and I locked all the doors immediately, starting the engine with trembling fingers. Through the house's front window, I could see the man standing in the living room now, just watching us through the glass. He wasn't chasing us or trying to hide. He just stood there like he was curious about what we'd do next. I threw the car in reverse and backed out of that driveway so fast I nearly hit the mailbox, and as we drove away, I saw him move toward the door like maybe he was going to come outside. I drove straight to the grocery store parking lot about a mile away, where there were lots of lights and people, and that's where Nathan found us 10 minutes later, all three of us still sitting in my car with the doors locked. Nathan called 911 while I called the Andersons, and Mrs. Anderson answered on the second ring, music and laughter loud in the background. When I told her what happened, trying to keep my voice steady so I wouldn't completely panic the kids who were listening, she went silent for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then she started asking rapid-fire questions. What did he look like? Did he hurt anyone? Where were we now? And I could hear her telling her husband to get the car immediately. The police arrived at the house before the Andersons did, and Nathan followed them back there, while I stayed with the kids in the store parking lot, buying them hot chocolate from the Starbucks inside and trying to keep them calm. About an hour later, Officer Daniels called me to take a statement. They'd found the guy still in the house. Apparently he'd gone back up to the attic when he heard the sirens. He was a homeless man named William Torrey, who'd been reported missing from a halfway house about 40 miles away 3 months earlier. He'd been living in the Andersons' attic for at least a month, maybe longer, surviving on food he'd sneak down to steal at night, and using their bathroom when he thought everyone was asleep. The police found his makeshift living space up there. A sleeping bag he'd probably grabbed from the Andersons' garage, empty food containers stacked in a corner, bottles filled with urine because he couldn't always risk coming down to use the bathroom, and notebooks where he'd been writing down the family's schedule and routines. He knew when they left for work, when the kids got home from school, when they usually went to bed. He'd been entering through a broken ventilation grate on the side of the house that led directly into the attic, something the Andersons hadn't even known was damaged because it was hidden behind an overgrown bush. The detective told me later that Torrey had probably been watching us all evening through small gaps in the ceiling. There were several spots where he'd carefully made tiny holes to see into the rooms below. What really disturbed me was that he'd written about me in his notebook, noting that I was a new girl and that I'd arrived at 4 p.m. He'd been right above us the whole time, listening to everything, and only came down because he'd gotten too comfortable, too confident that we were just kids who wouldn't do anything even if we saw him. The Andersons were obviously horrified and kept apologizing to me and my parents, offering to pay for therapy if I needed it, asking over and over if I was okay. They moved out of that house within a month, and as far as I know, never went back even to pack everything. They hired a moving company to do it all. Oliver and Mia ended up needing counseling, especially Oliver, who blamed himself for not making his parents believe him sooner. Torrey was charged with breaking and entering, trespassing, and some other stuff I can't remember. But because he had mental health issues and hadn't technically hurt anyone, he only got 2 years in jail plus mandatory psychiatric treatment. I still babysit sometimes, but I always check every closet, every room, and yes, every attic access before the parents leave. I know the odds of something like this happening again are basically zero, but I can't help it. The thing that still keeps me up sometimes is thinking about all those nights the Anderson kids were sleeping just a few feet below a complete stranger who was watching them, studying them, and they were completely helpless. Oliver was right to be scared, and the fact that no one believed him until it was almost too late is something I don't think any of us involved will ever really get over. The August heat in 2018 was unbearable, the kind that makes the air shimmer above the pavement and turns your car into an oven, even with the AC blasting. I was 34 then, managing a small accounting firm downtown while my wife Rebecca taught 5th grade at the local elementary school. We lived in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from the city center, one of those places where kids still rode bikes until dark and neighbors actually knew each other's names. Our twin daughters, Lily and Grace, had just turned 7 that summer, and finding reliable childcare had become our biggest challenge. Both sets of grandparents lived states away, and most teenagers in the area had summer jobs or were away at camps. That's when Rebecca found Melissa through a colleague at school, a 19-year-old college student home for summer break, studying early childhood education, with glowing references from 3 families in the neighboring town. Melissa had been watching the girls for about 6 weeks by then, and honestly, she seemed like a gift from heaven. She'd show up 15 minutes early, always had activities planned, and the girls absolutely adored her. She had this warm, easy way about her. Auburn hair, always in a neat ponytail, modest clothes, never on her phone when we got home. The girls would beg us to go out just so Melissa could come over. That particular Saturday, Rebecca and I had tickets to her company's annual fundraising gala at the Riverside Hotel downtown. It was one of those events you couldn't really skip. Her principal would be there, along with most of the school board. Rebecca had bought a new dress specifically for it, this deep green number that made her eyes pop, and I'd actually gotten my good suit dry cleaned for once. We'd left the house around 6:30, giving Melissa the usual rundown. Bedtime at 8:30, emergency numbers on the fridge, leftover pasta in the microwave if she got hungry. The gala turned out to be one of those painfully formal affairs where everyone stands around making small talk, while pretending the tiny portions of overpriced food are actually filling. By 8:15, Rebecca was struggling in her heels, and I'd already heard the same story about the school district's budget 3 times from different board members. We were stationed near the silent auction table when Rebecca's principal, Mr. Hutchinson, started what promised to be a lengthy monologue about standardized testing reforms. About 20 minutes into his speech, his wife suddenly clutched her stomach and went pale. Turned out the shrimp appetizers hadn't agreed with her. In the chaos that followed, with Mr. Hutchinson frantically calling for his car and apologizing profusely, Rebecca and I exchanged a look. Nobody would notice if we slipped out early too. We made our quiet goodbyes to a few colleagues, claiming I had an early morning conference call, and headed for the parking garage. The relief of escaping that stuffy ballroom was immediate. Rebecca kicked off her heels before we even reached the car, laughing about how we'd just gotten a free pass from the world's most boring event. The drive home was peaceful, windows down to let in the cooler evening air, Rebecca humming along to some old song on the radio. We'd decided not to text Melissa we were coming back early, partly because we didn't want her to feel like we didn't trust her to handle the full evening, but mostly because Rebecca thought it would be nice to surprise the girls if they were still awake. Maybe we'd all have ice cream and watch a movie together. As we turned onto our street, I noticed how quiet everything seemed. Porch lights on, a few TVs flickering through windows, the Davenport's cat prowling across their lawn. Our house looked exactly as we'd left it, warm light spilling from the living room window, Rebecca's garden gnomes standing guard by the walkway. I pulled into the driveway behind Melissa's beat-up Ford Focus, and we gathered our things, Rebecca still carrying her heels, both of us moving quietly in case the girls were already asleep. The front door was locked, which was good. We'd stressed to Melissa about keeping it secured after dark. I turned my key slowly, trying not to make too much noise. The moment we stepped inside, I heard voices from the living room. Melissa's familiar laugh mixed with something else, a deeper voice that made me pause in the entryway. Rebecca heard it too, her hand finding my arm, both of us standing there in the dim hallway trying to process what we were hearing. It was definitely a man's voice, low and rough, saying something I couldn't quite make out. Then Melissa laughed again, but it sounded different this time, nervous, higher-pitched than usual. Rebecca and I exchanged a quick glance, and I moved forward first, my socks silent on the hardwood floor. The living room doorway was about 10 feet ahead, and as I got closer I could smell something strange, cigarette smoke, which we absolutely never allowed in the house, mixed with something else, like motor oil or gasoline. The TV was on but muted, casting shifting blue light across the hallway wall. I heard the man's voice again, clearer now. "They always keep the good stuff hidden somewhere. Check that cabinet over there." My whole body went rigid. Rebecca was right behind me, her breathing quick and shallow, and I could feel her trembling slightly. Every instinct told me to rush in, but something about that voice, the casual way he talked about going through our things, made me pause. I peered around the doorframe just enough to see inside. Melissa was on our couch, and next to her sat a man I'd never seen before. He was probably mid-40s, wearing a stained gray work shirt and jeans with holes at the knees. His hair was thin and greasy, pulled back in a stringy ponytail, and even from across the room I could see the crude tattoos covering his arms. Not professional work, more like the kind people get in prison. His boots were on our coffee table, leaving dirt marks on the glass, and in his hand was a beer from our fridge. But what made my chest tighten was the way he was sitting, completely relaxed, like he owned the place, one arm draped behind Melissa on the couch. She looked small next to him, her usual ponytail messy, and she kept glancing toward the stairs that led up to the girls' rooms. "Come on, baby, don't be so uptight," the man said, pulling Melissa closer. "I told you they won't be back for hours. Rich people love their fancy parties." His hand moved to her shoulder and I saw her stiffen. "Besides, you said their kids are heavy sleepers. We could make all the noise we want." That's when I noticed the backpack by his feet. Black, military style, partially unzipped. Something metallic gleamed inside, but I couldn't tell what it was from my angle. Melissa mumbled something I couldn't hear, and he laughed, an ugly sound that made my skin prickle. "Don't worry about it. After tonight, you won't have to babysit anymore. We'll have enough to get out of this dump of a town." He took another swig of beer, then stood up suddenly, and I pulled back into the shadows. "Where'd you say they keep the jewelry again? Upstairs bedroom, right?" I heard footsteps moving toward the hallway, toward us, and Rebecca grabbed my arm so tight her nails dug through my sleeve. I pulled Rebecca back quickly, guiding her into the kitchen as silently as possible. My mind was racing, trying to process what we just heard. This man was planning to rob us, and Melissa was involved somehow. But the way she'd looked, the tension in her body, made me wonder if she was there willingly. Rebecca was already pulling out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911. I kept myself positioned where I could see the hallway, ready to act if he headed upstairs toward our daughters. The dispatcher answered, and Rebecca whispered our address, explaining the situation in short, clipped sentences. I heard movement from the living room, heavy footsteps pacing, Melissa's voice saying something about waiting, about being careful. Then the man's voice, sharper now. "I've been waiting in that stinking garage for 3 hours. You said this would be easy money. Now stop being scared and help me find their stuff." The garage. He'd been in our garage, waiting. The thought made me sick. How long had this been planned? The dispatcher was telling Rebecca to stay on the line, that units were on their way, but to stay hidden and not confront the intruders. The next few minutes felt like hours. We could hear them moving around the living room, drawers being opened, things being moved. At one point I heard something glass break, followed by Melissa's sharp intake of breath and the man saying, "Shut up, it's just some cheap vase." Then suddenly, horrifyingly, I heard small footsteps on the stairs. "Melissa." It was Lily's voice, sleepy and confused. "I heard something break, is everything okay?" My heart nearly stopped. Rebecca's face went white and I had to physically hold her back from running out there. We heard Melissa's voice, artificially bright. "Everything's fine, sweetie, just drop something, go back to bed." But Lily, always the more persistent twin, came down another step. "Who's that man? Is that your dad?" There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever. Then the man's voice, trying to sound friendly but failing. "Yeah, kid, I'm her dad. Just came to pick her up. Go back to sleep." Another pause, then Lily. "But Melissa said her dad lives in Colorado." "You don't sound like you're from Colorado." Everything happened fast after that. The man cursed loudly and I heard rapid footsteps. He was heading toward the stairs, toward Lily. That's when every careful thought left my head. I burst out of the kitchen shouting, "Get away from her!" He spun around, his face a mix of surprise and rage. Up close, I could see the wild look in his bloodshot eyes. the way his jaw clenched and unclenched. Melissa jumped up from the couch, crying, "No, no, no, this wasn't supposed to happen like this." Lily stood frozen on the stairs, her pink pajamas with the unicorn print looking so small and vulnerable. The man reached into his backpack, and that's when I saw it clearly. A large hunting knife in a leather sheath. But before he could grab it, we heard sirens, multiple sirens getting louder fast. His eyes darted between me, the stairs, and the front door. "You called the cops?" he snarled at Melissa. "You stupid little—" But she was already backing away from him, shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. The sirens were right outside now, and I saw red and blue lights flashing through the windows. "Lily, go to your room and lock the door, now!" I commanded, and thankfully she ran back upstairs. The man looked like a trapped animal, his hand still hovering near the backpack. The police announcement came through a megaphone. "This is the police, come out with your hands visible." The man grabbed his backpack and made a dash for the back door, but Rebecca had locked it from the kitchen, and he struggled with the deadbolt, cursing frantically. That's when the front door burst open, and 3 officers rushed in, weapons drawn. "Drop the bag! Hands where we can see them!" The man actually tried to rush past them, which was the stupidest thing he could have done. They had him on the ground in seconds, his face pressed against our hardwood floor while they cuffed him. Melissa had collapsed on the couch, sobbing hysterically, repeating, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," over and over. One officer stayed with her while another secured the scene. Rebecca ran upstairs to check on both girls, and I heard Grace's door open, both twins crying but safe. The officer examining the man's backpack pulled out not just the hunting knife, but also zip ties, a roll of duct tape, and what looked like a small crowbar. "Jesus," he muttered, then louder to his partner, "Call for another unit. This is bigger than a simple break-in." What we learned over the next several hours turned our relief into a different kind of horror. The man's name was Robert Crenshaw, and he had a record that made my blood run cold. Aggravated assault, attempted kidnapping of a minor in 2016, and he'd just been released from prison 8 months ago. Melissa, sobbing in the police station, told them everything. She'd met him at a gas station 3 weeks earlier. He seemed charming at first, buying her coffee, telling her how pretty she was, how mature she seemed for her age. He'd slowly convinced her that we were wealthy people who wouldn't even notice if some jewelry went missing, that it would be victimless, easy money for them to start a new life together. But the detective who interviewed us later told us something that still haunts me. They'd found a notebook in his car with detailed notes about our routine, the girls' schedules, even drawings of our house layout. Next to Lily and Grace's names, he'd written, "Blonde, approximately 50-60 pounds. Quiet neighborhood. Garage has broken lock on side door." The robbery story was just what he'd told Melissa to get her cooperation. The zip ties and duct tape suggested something much darker. The detective believed he'd been planning to take the girls, and Melissa had unknowingly given him the perfect opportunity. She hadn't known about his record. He'd told her his name was Alex and that he worked construction. She thought she was helping with a simple theft, not realizing she'd let a predator into our home. The guilt destroyed her. Last I heard, she'd dropped out of college and moved back with her parents out of state. As for us, we moved within 6 months. Even after installing security cameras and new locks, we could never feel safe in that house again. The girls went through months of therapy, and Grace still has nightmares sometimes. But we were lucky. We came home early that night. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if Mr. Hutchinson's wife hadn't gotten sick from those shrimp, and I have to stop myself from going down that dark path. The semester had just started at Penn State, and I was desperately searching for ways to make extra cash. My roommate Jessica and I were splitting a cramped apartment near campus, and between textbooks and groceries, my savings account was looking pathetic. I was 20 years old, majoring in psychology, and had been babysitting since high school. It seemed like the perfect side gig while keeping up with classes. Every morning, I'd grab my laptop and head to this small cafe called the Grindhouse, about 2 blocks from campus. They had decent Wi-Fi, and the owner, Mrs. Chen, always gave students free refills. That Tuesday morning in early September was no different, except for the man who approached me while I was updating my profile on a babysitting website. He looked completely normal, maybe mid-30s, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis like he'd just stepped out of an office. Clean-shaven wedding ring, carrying a leather messenger bag. Everything about him screamed suburban dad. He apologized for interrupting, said he'd overheard me talking on the phone about needing babysitting work, and explained that he and his wife were desperate for someone reliable. His name was David Brennan, and he had twin girls, 6 years old, named Sophie and Ella. He showed me photos on his phone. 2 adorable blonde kids in matching sundresses, playing on a swing set in what looked like a beautiful backyard. He said his regular nanny had just quit without notice, and his wife was traveling for work. The job would be 3 evenings a week, paying $25 an hour, cash. That was almost double what I usually made, and he needed someone to start that very evening. I should have noticed the weird details right then. He kept checking his phone every few seconds, like he was waiting for something. When I asked for his wife's contact information, he said she was on a flight to Seattle and wouldn't be reachable until tomorrow. He gave me the address, 4782 Willow Creek Drive, and said to arrive at 7 sharp because he had a business dinner downtown. I asked if I could meet the girls first, maybe stop by in the afternoon, but he insisted they were at school until 5 and then had piano lessons. Everything had an explanation. Every question had an answer that made just enough sense. He even gave me a list of the girls' allergies. Sophie couldn't have peanuts, Ella was lactose intolerant, and their bedtime routine written on a post-it note. He paid me $40 up front as a good faith deposit and shook my hand with this firm, professional grip before leaving. The rest of the day, I couldn't focus on my classes. I kept thinking about that easy money, how I could finally afford to fix my car's broken AC before the weather got hot again. I texted Jessica about the job, and she said I was lucky to find something that paid so well. Around 6:30, I drove out to Willow Creek Drive, following my GPS through neighborhoods that got progressively nicer the further I went from campus. The houses were huge, with manicured lawns and those fancy lampposts at the end of each driveway. When I pulled up to 4782, my first thought was that these people definitely could afford $25 an hour. It was a beautiful 2-story colonial with white pillars and black shutters, the kind of place you see in real estate magazines. But something was weird. There were no toys in the yard, no bikes in the driveway, no colorful curtains in what should have been kids' bedroom windows. I rang the doorbell at exactly 7 o'clock, and David answered immediately, like he'd been standing right behind the door waiting. He was dressed differently now, jeans and a polo shirt instead of business clothes, and there was this energy about him that hadn't been there at the cafe. He kept talking fast, explaining that the girls were already upstairs playing quietly, that they'd eaten dinner, that they were shy with new people, so I shouldn't worry if they didn't come down right away. The house smelled strange, like fresh paint mixed with some kind of chemical cleaner, even though everything looked lived in. He showed me around quickly, too quickly, pointing out the kitchen, the bathroom, the living room with its leather furniture and massive TV. There were photos on the mantel, but when I looked closer, they were all generic stock photos that come with picture frames. Not a single real family photo anywhere. The refrigerator had no drawings, no magnets, nothing that said kids lived here. David said he was already running late and practically pushed the emergency contact list into my hands. His cell number, the restaurant where he'd be, and supposedly his wife's number, though he reminded me she was unreachable. He grabbed a jacket from the coat rack and headed for the door, telling me the girls would probably come down for a snack around 8. Bedtime was 9:30, and I should make myself comfortable. Then he was gone, and I heard his car pull away fast, tires actually squealing a little on the pavement. I stood in that too quiet house listening for any sound of children playing upstairs. Nothing. No footsteps, no giggles, no TV sounds, no toys clattering. I called out, "Sophie, Ella, I'm Amanda, your babysitter for tonight." My voice echoed in the stairwell. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and listened harder. The house was completely, unnaturally silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway was dark with 4 closed doors. I knocked on the first one, said "Girls," and opened it. Empty. A guest bedroom with a perfectly made bed and nothing else. The second door was a bathroom. The third was an office with a desk and computer. The fourth door was supposedly the girls' room. It had 2 small beds with pink comforters, a few stuffed animals arranged too perfectly, and a bookshelf with children's books that looked brand new, spines uncracked. The closet had exactly 6 outfits hanging in 2 sizes, tags still on some of them. That's when my whole body went cold. This wasn't a kid's room. This was a stage set. I pulled out my phone to text Jessica, but I had no signal, not one bar. I tried connecting to Wi-Fi, but there was none. I went back downstairs, my legs feeling weak, and tried the landline in the kitchen. Dead. No dial tone, just silence. The front door was my first instinct, but when I turned the knob, it wouldn't budge. Not locked in a normal way. It didn't even rattle or move slightly. I ran to the back door in the kitchen. Same thing. The windows all had locks on them that needed a key from the inside. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I was trapped. That's when I heard a door open somewhere in the house. Not upstairs, but somewhere on the first floor. Maybe a basement door or a closet I hadn't noticed. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, were coming from the back of the house. Not David's quick, nervous energy from before. These were patient, measured steps. Then I heard another set of footsteps from upstairs, directly above me. There were at least 2 people in this house with me, and neither of them were 6-year-old girls. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen block, my hand trembling so bad I could barely grip it. The footsteps stopped, both sets at the exact same moment, like they were communicating somehow. The silence was worse than the footsteps. I backed into a corner where I could see both the hallway and the kitchen entrance, holding that knife in front of me, like it could actually protect me from whatever this was. Then I saw him, not David, but another man, older, maybe 50, with gray hair and wearing work clothes like a maintenance uniform. He stood at the kitchen entrance, not moving, just watching me with this blank expression. He didn't look angry or excited or anything, just empty, like this was a normal Tuesday night for him. "She's in here," he called out, not to me but to whoever was upstairs. His voice was calm, conversational. The footsteps upstairs started again, heading toward the staircase. I screamed at him to stay back, waving the knife, but he just tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was an interesting specimen. That's when I remembered the window in the bathroom. It was smaller than the others, the kind with frosted glass that usually just has a simple latch. I had maybe 10 seconds before whoever was upstairs made it down. I threw the knife at the gray-haired man. It missed completely but made him step back, and I ran. I sprinted to the bathroom, slammed the door, and locked it. The window was small but not impossible. I could hear them both outside the door now, not pounding or yelling, just calmly trying the handle. One of them said something about the new lock working perfectly. I stood on the toilet, punched the frosted glass with my elbow wrapped in a towel. It shattered outward, the sound incredibly loud in that quiet house. I could hear them fumbling with keys now, multiple keys, like they had a whole ring of them. I squeezed through that window, feeling the remaining glass scrape my stomach and legs, not caring about the cuts. I dropped 8 feet onto the grass, landing hard on my ankle but immediately getting up and running. Behind me, I could hear the bathroom door finally burst open, and one of them shouting something I couldn't make out. I ran through the backyard, which was deeper and darker than it looked from the front. There was a wooden fence at the back, old and tall, but I could see a neighbor's house lit up beyond it. I threw myself at that fence, climbing like my life depended on it, because it did. I could hear one of them coming through the window behind me, grunting as he tried to fit through the opening I'd barely managed. My hands were slippery with blood from the glass cuts, making it hard to grip the fence boards. When I finally got to the top and swung my leg over, I saw the gray-haired man coming around the side of the house, moving faster than I expected. He was carrying something, rope or zip ties, I couldn't tell in the dark. I dropped into the neighbor's yard and ran straight to their back door, pounding on it and screaming for help. An elderly woman answered, took one look at me, bloody, crying, hysterical, and immediately pulled me inside, locking the door behind us. Her husband called 911 while she grabbed towels for my cuts. I was sobbing so hard I could barely tell the operator what happened. The police arrived within minutes, but when they went to the house at 4782 Willow Creek Drive, it was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. The furniture was gone, the fake kids' room was cleared out, even the stock photos had been removed. The neighbors said the house had been a rental property, vacant for months, and someone must have broken in to use it. They found the listing online. It had been taken down that very evening. David Brennan, of course, wasn't a real name. The police found 3 other reports in different states, same setup, fake babysitting job, but I was the only one who had gotten away. They never caught them. I was 19 and needed money for college, so when my mom's co-worker mentioned her neighbors needed a babysitter for their 8-month-old daughter, I jumped at the chance. The Thompsons lived in this beautiful colonial house about 20 minutes from campus, the kind with the wraparound porch and those expensive shutters that actually worked. Mrs. Thompson was a pediatric nurse who worked nights, and Mr. Thompson traveled for some investment firm. They paid $60 for 4 hours, which was incredible money for basically watching Netflix while a baby slept. That particular Thursday in early May, Mrs. Thompson had left for her shift at 7, and Mr. Thompson was supposedly in Boston for some conference. The baby, Chloe, had gone down easy around 8:30, and I was settled on their leather couch with my laptop, working on a paper about Victorian literature that was due Monday. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:47. I remember because I'd just checked my phone to see if my boyfriend had texted back. Nobody ever came to the Thompsons' house that late, especially not on a weeknight. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a wrinkled gray suit, maybe 45, with this weird nervous energy that made him shift his weight from foot to foot. His hair stuck up in places like he'd been running his fingers through it repeatedly, and there was something about his eyes. They were too wide, too focused, like he was running on pure adrenaline. When I opened the door with the chain still on, he immediately started talking, his words tumbling out fast and desperate. "I need to speak with Michael Thompson. Tell him Doug Lawson is here. Tell him I know what he did with the pension fund, with my mother's retirement, with everyone's money." His breath smelled like coffee and something metallic, and I noticed his hands kept moving to his jacket pocket, then away, then back again. I tried to explain that Mr. Thompson wasn't home, that I was just the babysitter, but Doug wasn't listening. He pushed against the door hard enough that the chain started pulling the frame, and his voice got louder, more aggressive. "Don't lie to me. His car is in the garage. I checked. That black Audi with the custom plates." The thing was, he was right. Mr. Thompson's car was there because he'd taken an Uber to the airport. Something about drinking with clients before his flight. I was about to suggest he call Mr. Thompson's office tomorrow, when Doug pulled his hand out of his pocket, and everything in my body went cold. The gun wasn't huge like in movies. It was small, black, almost looked like a toy except for how heavy it seemed in his shaking hand. "Open the door," he said, and his voice had gone quiet, which was somehow worse than the yelling. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to wait for Michael. We need to have a conversation about the 43 families he destroyed." Before I could react, before I could even think about slamming the door, he pushed harder and the chain snapped, just tore right out of the wood like it was nothing. He stumbled into the foyer and I backed up until I hit the console table, knocking over a vase that shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound was explosive in the quiet house, and immediately Chloe started crying upstairs. Doug's head snapped toward the stairs and his whole face changed. This strange mix of surprise and something else, maybe panic. "There's a kid here?" he asked, like he hadn't considered that possibility. I nodded, unable to form words, and watched as he closed the front door behind him, turning the deadbolt with this deliberate slowness that made my chest tight. "Get the baby," he said, waving the gun toward the stairs but not exactly pointing it at me. "Bring it down here. Michael needs to see what he's fighting for when he gets home. He needs to understand what it feels like when someone takes everything from you." My legs felt like water as I climbed the stairs, each step taking forever while Chloe's cries got louder. She was standing in her crib, face red and streaked with tears, clutching the rails with those tiny, perfect fingers. When I picked her up, she grabbed onto my shirt and buried her face in my shoulder, still sobbing but starting to calm down. I could hear Doug pacing downstairs, his shoes clicking on the hardwood in this irregular rhythm. 3 steps, pause, 5 steps, pause, 2 steps. I held Chloe tighter and walked back down, each stair creaking under my weight. Doug was in the living room now, standing by the window with the curtain pulled back slightly, watching the street. The gun was still in his hand but hanging at his side, and I could see his finger wasn't on the trigger, which felt important somehow. "Sit," he said without looking at me, gesturing toward the couch with his free hand. "We're going to wait." I sat down with Chloe on my lap, and she immediately started reaching for my phone on the coffee table, making these little chirping sounds she always made when she wanted something. Doug turned from the window and really looked at her for the first time, and his expression did something complicated. His jaw clenched and unclenched, and he rubbed his face with his free hand. "How old?" he asked, his voice different now, rougher. When I told him 8 months, he made this sound that wasn't quite a laugh. My grandson would have been about that age. Would have been if his parents hadn't lost their house. If my son hadn't. He trailed off and went back to watching the window. "Michael Thompson told them it was a sure thing. Told all of us. Trust me," he said. "This is how you secure your family's future." And then he walked away with his commission while we lost everything. My son drove his car into a bridge abutment 3 months later, 60 miles an hour. They said it was an accident. The way he said accident made it clear he didn't believe that. And suddenly I understood this wasn't just about money. Chloe started fussing again, squirming in my arms and making those pre-cry whimpers that meant she was hungry. I asked Doug if I could get her bottle from the kitchen, and he followed me, staying about 6 feet behind like he was trying to maintain some kind of boundary. The formula was already made in the fridge. Mrs. Thompson always prepared everything in advance, and I heated it in the bottle warmer while Doug leaned against the door frame, the gun now tucked in his waistband but still visible. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly, and when I told him it was Jenny, he nodded slowly. "Jenny. You seem like a good kid. I'm sorry you're in the middle of this, but Michael needs to understand consequences. He's been avoiding me for months, blocked my number, had security escort me out of his office building. His lawyer sent a cease and desist letter. Can you believe that? A cease and desist like I'm the criminal." His laugh was bitter and sharp, and it made Chloe turn her head toward him, bottle still in her mouth, studying him with those serious baby eyes. We went back to the living room, and Doug started talking more like he needed someone to understand. He told me about the investment scheme, about how Michael had specifically targeted older clients at his previous firm, people close to retirement who couldn't afford to take risks. He showed them fake portfolios, doctored returns, had this whole elaborate setup with false documents and even a fake auditor who was actually his college roommate. 43 families lost their retirement savings. Most of them were too embarrassed to even report it, thought it was their fault for being greedy. But I did my research. I tracked down every single person he scammed. The FBI said there wasn't enough evidence that the paper trail was too clean. But I know what he did. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a younger man who looked just like him, standing next to a woman holding a newborn. That was my son Andrew. Software engineer. Had his whole life planned out. His voice cracked on the word planned, and for a second the gun in his waistband looked less like a weapon and more like the last option of a desperate man. Around 10:30, Chloe fell asleep in my arms, her weight warm and trusting against my chest. Doug had moved to the armchair across from us, and I could see him fighting exhaustion. His eyelids would droop, then snap open whenever a car passed outside. I carefully reached for my phone, thinking maybe I could text someone, but he noticed immediately. "Put it in the kitchen," he said, not angry, just tired. "Please. I can't have you calling anyone until Michael gets here. He usually comes home by 11 when he travels. Never stays overnight if he can help it." As I walked to the kitchen with Chloe still sleeping against me, I noticed the family photos on the wall. Michael Thompson smiling at a company party, his arm around his wife, both of them looking successful and untouchable. When I came back, Doug was staring at those same photos with an expression I couldn't read. "You know what the worst part is?" he said quietly. "He probably doesn't even remember my son's name. Just another account number in his scam. Andrew Lawson, reduced to a statistic." At 11:15, we heard a car in the driveway. Doug jumped up so fast he knocked over a glass of water I'd set on the side table, and his hand went straight to the gun. Through the window, I could see Mr. Thompson getting out of an Uber, checking his phone as he walked toward the door. Doug positioned himself behind the door, telling me to stay on the couch with the baby, to not move, to not say anything. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure Chloe would wake up from the vibration. The key turned in the lock, and Mr. Thompson walked in already talking. "Jenny, sorry I'm late. Flight got delayed and—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw my face, and then Doug stepped out from behind the door. "Hello, Michael," Doug said, and Mr. Thompson's briefcase hit the floor with a thud that seemed to echo forever. "We need to talk about Andrew Lawson. You remember that name, don't you? Or was he just victim number 37 to you?" Mr. Thompson's face went white, not the shocked white of surprise, but the guilty white of recognition, and I knew then that everything Doug had said was true. "Doug, let's talk about this," Mr. Thompson said, his hands raised slightly, his voice taking on that smooth salesman tone that probably worked in boardrooms. "I understand you're upset. What happened with the fund was unfortunate, but it was a market downturn, not fraud. Your son's death was a tragedy, but—" Doug cut him off by pulling out the gun, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it. Don't you dare stand there and lie to my face. I have the emails, Michael. The ones you thought you deleted. Your roommate kept copies before you threw him under the bus, too. $60,000 my mother had saved over 40 years of teaching 3rd grade. Gone. You bought that Audi the next week." Mr. Thompson's eyes darted to me and Chloe, and something shifted in his face. "Your daughter," Doug continued, his voice breaking slightly. "You get to hold your daughter. You get to watch her grow up. My son will never, Andrew will never—" He couldn't finish the sentence, and the gun in his hand started shaking. What happened next took maybe 10 seconds but felt like an hour. "Mr. Thompson lunged forward, not at Doug but toward us, toward his daughter, and Doug swung the gun up instinctively. The sound Chloe made when she woke up, this piercing shriek of pure fear, seemed to break something in Doug. He looked at the gun in his hand like he'd never seen it before, then at the terrified baby in my arms, and his whole body just crumpled. The gun fell to the floor, and he dropped to his knees, sobbing these horrible broken sounds. "Mr. Thompson grabbed the gun and kicked it across the room, then pulled out his phone to call 911, but his hands were trembling so badly he could barely dial. "I just wanted him to understand," Doug kept saying between sobs. "I just wanted someone to acknowledge what he did to us." I sat there holding Chloe, who was now screaming at full volume, watching this middle-aged man fall apart on the expensive hardwood floor while Mr. Thompson spoke rapidly to the dispatcher, giving our address, saying "armed intruder" over and over like it was the only phrase he knew. The police arrived within minutes, 3 cars with lights blazing, officers rushing in with their hands on their weapons. Doug didn't resist at all. He just sat there on the floor with his hands visible, tears still streaming down his face. As they cuffed him and read him his rights, he looked at Mr. Thompson one last time. The evidence is in a safety deposit box at First National. Box 447. The FBI will want to see it." Mr. Thompson's face went even paler, if that was possible, and he started to say something, but one of the officers was already asking him questions about the break-in. They took Doug away, and I heard later that he was charged with breaking and entering, criminal threatening, and unlawful possession of a firearm. But the strangest part came 2 weeks later when I saw in the news that Michael Thompson had been arrested for investment fraud. Turns out Doug's evidence was solid. Emails, recorded phone calls, bank records, everything. The FBI had reopened the case. Mrs. Thompson called me the next day to make sure I was okay, and to tell me they wouldn't need me to babysit anymore. They were moving, she said, somewhere fresh. She sent me a check for $500 with a note that just said, "I'm sorry. I never told anyone the whole truth about that night, about how Mr. Thompson's face confirmed his guilt before Doug even showed the evidence, or how Doug had specifically avoided pointing the gun at anyone until that last moment of panic. I still think about it sometimes, especially when I see Chloe's picture on Mrs. Thompson's Instagram. She's 3 now, living in Michigan under what I assume is her mother's maiden name. Doug Lawson got 18 months in minimum security and mandatory counseling. Michael Thompson got 12 years federal time and was ordered to pay restitution, though I doubt those 43 families will ever see much of their money back. There's no clean ending to this story, no moment where everything made sense. Just a Thursday night where I got caught between 2 men destroyed by greed and grief, while a baby cried in my arms and everything unraveled in a stranger's living room. Saturday nights usually meant hanging out with friends at the mall or catching a movie, but that particular evening in early November found me driving through an unfamiliar neighborhood with my phone's GPS guiding me to Oakwood Court. I was 17, had been babysitting for extra cash since freshman year, and Mrs. Coleman was offering $50 for what she promised would be an easy night watching her 6-year-old son Noah. She'd found me through a mom's Facebook group where several parents had recommended me, and when she called 2 days earlier, her voice carried that particular strain of desperation that meant her regular sitter had bailed. The money would cover half my car insurance for the month, and honestly, spending a few hours watching cartoons with a kid seemed better than another night scrolling through social media while my friends posted stories from parties I couldn't afford to attend. Their house sat at the very end of the cul-de-sac, one of those modern 2-stories with big windows and gray siding that seem to be popping up everywhere lately. Behind it, thick woods stretched out into darkness, the trees already bare from autumn wind. Mr. Coleman greeted me at the door in a tuxedo that pulled tight across his shoulders, fumbling with cufflinks while his wife's voice drifted from upstairs, something about not finding the right shoes. Noah stood beside his father, clutching a stuffed triceratops and studying me with those serious eyes that some kids get when meeting new people. Mrs. Coleman rushed down the stairs 5 minutes later, in a burgundy dress, her hair still slightly damp from curling, and launched into rapid-fire instructions. Emergency numbers on the fridge, pediatrician's info in the drawer, Noah already ate dinner, bedtime at 9 sharp, absolutely no scary movies even if he begs. They were gone within 10 minutes, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive perfume and the quiet hum of a house I didn't know. Noah turned out to be one of those easy kids who mostly entertained himself. We built a fortress out of couch cushions in the living room, and he showed me his collection of dinosaur books, explaining in detail which ones were herbivores and which ones would definitely eat us if they were still alive. Around 8:30, while we were halfway through his favorite animated movie about talking cars, I noticed movement outside the big picture window that faced the front yard. Just a quick shadow passing by, probably someone walking their dog. But when I looked closer, I could make out a figure standing at the edge of the driveway, right where the streetlights reach faded into darkness. They weren't moving, just standing there facing the house. I kept Noah distracted, not wanting to scare him, but every few minutes I'd glance back and the person would still be there. After about 15 minutes, I casually got up to get a snack and peeked through the kitchen window for a different angle. The figure had moved closer, now standing by the Coleman's mailbox, still watching. I told myself it was probably just someone from the neighborhood, maybe a teenager smoking where their parents couldn't see them, or someone waiting for a ride. But something about the way they stood so still, never checking a phone, never shifting their weight, made my chest feel tight. Noah asked for juice, and while I poured it in the kitchen, I noticed the side door that led to the garage. Mrs. Coleman had mentioned it during her rush tour, saying it was tricky, and to make sure it was locked, because sometimes it didn't catch properly. I checked it, definitely locked. Through the small window in the door, I could see into the dark garage, and beyond that, another window that showed the side yard. My breath caught. The figure was there now, standing between the house and the fence, maybe 10 feet from where I was standing. This close, I could see it was a man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark jacket with the hood up. He wasn't looking at the garage door, though. His head was tilted up toward the second-floor windows. Grabbed my phone and scrolled to Mrs. Coleman's number, then hesitated. What would I even say? There's someone standing in your yard? He hadn't done anything threatening, hadn't tried to get in, hadn't even approached the doors. They'd be at their gala by now, probably just sitting down to dinner. I decided to text my mom instead, keeping it casual, just letting her know where I was and that everything was fine. Noah wanted to show me his room before bed, so I carried him upstairs on my back, making dinosaur noises to keep things light. His bedroom was at the front of the house, decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and more dinosaur posters than I could count. While he brushed his teeth in the bathroom, I stood by his window and carefully pulled the curtain aside just enough to see out. The man was back at the front of the house now, standing in the middle of the lawn. From this angle, I could see he was wearing work boots and dark pants, maybe jeans. His face was completely hidden by the hood, but I could tell he was looking up, directly at the window where I stood. I stepped back quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Noah came padding back in his socks, and I tucked him into bed, trying to keep my voice steady while I read him a story about a friendly brontosaurus. He was out within 10 minutes, his breathing deep and even, still clutching the stuffed triceratops. I left his door cracked open like Mrs. Coleman had instructed and went back downstairs, every nerve in my body on high alert. The living room felt too exposed with those big windows, so I settled in the kitchen, where I could see both the front door and the side door to the garage. I texted my friend Jenna, asking if she was still up, needing the connection to someone, anyone. While waiting for her response, I heard it, a soft scraping sound from the side of the house, like someone dragging something against the siding. I crept to the side door window and peered out. The man was right there, his face inches from the glass, though I still couldn't make out his features in the darkness. But what made my whole body go cold was what I saw in his hand, a small notebook where he was writing something down, his eyes never leaving mine through the glass. I stumbled backward, knocking into the kitchen counter, and when I looked again, he was gone. Just empty darkness where he'd been standing seconds before. My phone buzzed, Jenna responding with some gossip about a party, but I couldn't focus on the words. I did a quick check of every door and window on the first floor, making sure everything was locked, yanking on each handle twice to be certain. The house had an alarm system, but Mrs. Coleman hadn't given me the code, only mentioned that they rarely used it. I found a large kitchen knife in the drawer and set it on the counter, then felt ridiculous and put it back, then grabbed it again. The silence in the house was suffocating, every small sound. The refrigerator humming, the heater clicking on, made me jump. I positioned myself where I could see the front door, the stairs, and the hallway leading to the garage door all at once. 20 minutes passed with no sign of the man. Maybe he'd left. Maybe he was just some local weirdo who liked to freak people out. I started to relax slightly, even managed to respond to Jenna's texts with shaky thumbs. Then I heard Noah crying upstairs, that confused, half-awake whimper kids do when they have bad dreams. I rushed up, taking the stairs two at a time, and found him sitting up in bed, rubbing his eyes. He said someone was tapping on his window, that it woke him up. My blood turned to ice water in my veins, but I kept my voice calm, telling him it was probably just a tree branch. His window faced the front yard. There were no trees close enough to reach it. I picked him up and carried him downstairs with me, making up a story about having a special movie night since his parents were gone. I settled him on the couch with a blanket and put on another cartoon, volume low. While he watched, mesmerized and still half asleep, I called 911. I kept my voice quiet, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. She said a patrol car would swing by to check things out, probably within the next 15 to 20 minutes. As I hung up, I noticed something that made my legs feel weak. The side door to the garage, the one I'd checked twice, the one Mrs. Coleman warned me about, was standing slightly open, cold November air drifting into the kitchen. I grabbed Noah, who protested sleepily, and carried him to the powder room near the front entrance. It was the only room on the first floor with a lock on the door and no windows. I set him on the closed toilet seat. His dinosaur clutched against his chest and told him we were playing a game. Whoever could be the quietest would win a prize. His eyes were wide now, picking up on my fear despite my attempts to hide it. I locked the door and sat on the floor with my back against it, Noah in my lap, my phone in one hand with 911 ready to dial again. We could hear the house around us, the normal settling sounds that now seemed sinister, the hum of electronics, and then something else. Footsteps above us, slow and deliberate, moving through the second floor. Not the quick, light steps of someone searching, but measured, unhurried, like someone taking inventory. They moved from room to room, pausing occasionally. I could track their path. Noah's room first, then what must be the master bedroom, then the hallway bathroom. The toilet tank lid in our small bathroom could be used as a weapon if needed, I thought wildly, but I couldn't risk the noise of removing it. The footsteps stopped directly above us, and we heard drawers being opened and closed, not frantically but methodically. Noah pressed his face into my shoulder, his small body trembling, and I held him tighter, texting the 911 dispatcher with my free hand that someone was definitely in the house now. She told me units were 3 minutes out, to stay where I was, keep the door locked. 3 minutes feels like 3 hours when you're sitting in a bathroom with a terrified child, listening to a stranger walk through the house. The footsteps moved to the stairs, and we could hear each creak as he descended. 5th step, 4th, 3rd. I knew because I'd counted them earlier when carrying Noah up. He reached the bottom and paused. We could hear breathing on the other side of the bathroom door, heavy and slow. The doorknob turned once, testing. Then again, harder. Noah whimpered, and I pressed my hand gently over his mouth, tears running down both our faces. The man kicked the door once, hard enough to make the frame shake, and Noah's dinosaur fell to the floor with a soft thump. Then suddenly, beautifully, we heard sirens approaching, getting louder by the second. The footsteps retreated fast, running now, and we heard the side door slam. I stayed frozen in place, Noah still clutched against me, until I heard loud knocking and someone identifying themselves as police. Even then, I made them slip their badge under the bathroom door before I opened it. 2 officers were there, a younger guy with red hair and an older woman who immediately took charge. While the male officer searched the house and checked the perimeter, the woman sat with us in the living room, Noah on my lap, refusing to let go. She was patient and professional, taking my statement while keeping her voice soft enough not to further frighten Noah. The other officer came back and asked me to walk through the house with him to see if anything looked disturbed. In Noah's room, all his dresser drawers were open, clothes moved around but nothing obviously missing. The master bedroom was the same. Drawers opened, jewelry box on the dresser opened but still full, Mr. Coleman's watch still sitting on the nightstand. But in the small office at the end of the hall, we found what the intruder had been after. A filing cabinet was open, papers scattered on the desk, and the officer pointed out what I hadn't noticed. Several documents with social security numbers, bank statements, tax returns, everything someone would need for identity theft. The Colemans came home to a crime scene. Mrs. Coleman still in her burgundy dress, but now with a police jacket over her shoulders. Mascara streaked down her cheeks as she held Noah. The police found muddy footprints throughout the house. The intruder had been inside for at least 30 minutes before I'd locked us in the bathroom, walking through every room, even standing in the doorway of Noah's room while he slept. They found where he'd been watching from outside too, cigarette butts and footprints beneath several windows, suggesting he'd been there for hours before we even arrived, studying the house, waiting for the parents to leave. The side door lock was broken, looked like it had been for a while, just held closed by the deadbolt that I'd checked, but which could be jimmied open with a credit card. They never caught him, though the police said this matched a pattern of break-ins targeting houses with babysitters. Someone who knew teenage sitters would be less likely to confront them, more likely to hide with the children. Mrs. Coleman paid me triple what we'd agreed on and drove me home herself, apologizing over and over. I never babysat for a family I didn't know again, and even now, years later, I still check every lock twice and never sit with my back to a window. Most people think babysitting is easy money. Watch some kids, put them to bed, watch TV until the parents come home. I thought the same thing when I started doing it during my junior year of college. The extra cash helped with textbooks and rent for my cramped studio apartment near campus. It was a Saturday in early April when I got a call from the Waynes, a family I'd never worked for before. They'd gotten my number from another family I regularly sat for, the Johnsons. Mrs. Wayne sounded desperate on the phone. Their regular sitter had canceled last minute, and they had theater tickets they'd bought months in advance. She offered to pay double my usual rate if I could be there by 6. The money was too good to pass up, especially with finals coming up and my car needing new brakes. The Waynes lived in one of those pristine suburban developments where every house has the same mailbox, and the HOA sends you letters if your grass gets too long. Their house was a 2-story colonial with perfect white shutters and a wraparound porch that looked like something from a real estate magazine. Mr. Wayne answered the door wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my semester's tuition. He had this nervous energy about him, kept checking his watch and glancing back toward the stairs. Mrs. Wayne appeared behind him in a burgundy cocktail dress, her smile tight as she ushered me inside. They had 2 kids, she explained quickly. Lily, who was 7, and Ethan, who just turned 9. She mentioned Ethan could be a handful sometimes, but assured me both kids usually went to bed without much fuss. Something about the way Mr. Wayne's jaw tightened when she said Ethan's name should have been my first warning. After the parents left in a rush of perfume and car keys, I found Lily in the living room coloring at the coffee table. She had these huge brown eyes and kept her crayons organized by color in perfect rows. When I introduced myself, she barely looked up, just whispered hi, and went back to her drawing. I asked where her brother was, and she got this strange look on her face, like she was trying to decide whether to tell me something important. "He's in his room," she finally said, then added in an even quieter voice, "He's not supposed to come out until dinner." That struck me as odd. What 9-year-old gets sent to their room before the babysitter even arrives? I told her I'd go introduce myself to him, but she grabbed my wrist with her small hand. "Don't," she said, and there was something in her voice that made me pause. "Just wait until dinner, please." Her grip was surprisingly strong for such a little kid, and I noticed old scratches on her arms, some faded and some still pink. I decided to respect what seemed like a family rule, and stayed downstairs with Lily while she colored. She was drawing a house, but all the windows were colored in black, and there were no people in the picture. Around 6:30 I started making dinner. Mrs. Wayne had left instructions for mac and cheese and chicken nuggets. While the water was boiling, I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, and my first thought was how normal he looked. Sandy brown hair that stuck up in the back, freckles across his nose, wearing a dinosaur t-shirt and jeans. He had this wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, which were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost gray. "You must be the new babysitter," he said, and something about hearing such formal words from a 9-year-old felt wrong. He walked past me to the counter and picked up a knife from the block, turning it over in his hands like he was examining it. "We're not supposed to touch those," I said, keeping my voice light and friendly. He looked at me for a long moment, still holding the knife, before setting it down with a deliberate click against the granite. During dinner, Ethan sat directly across from me while Lily picked at her food beside him. He ate his chicken nuggets by tearing them apart with his fingers first, examining the inside before eating each piece. "Did you know," he said suddenly, "that chickens can live for 18 months without a head? There was this one chicken named Mike who survived after my grandpa chopped his head off for dinner." He smiled at Lily when he said this, and she pushed her plate away. I tried to change the subject, asking about school and friends, but Ethan kept steering the conversation back to disturbing topics. How long different animals could survive without air, what happens to bodies when they decompose, whether I'd ever seen something die. Lily excused herself to use the bathroom, and as soon as she left, Ethan leaned forward. "Want to see something cool in the basement?" he asked. When I said maybe later, his expression shifted just for a second to something darker. "Lily showed you her scratches, didn't she? She's so dramatic. She doesn't understand that sometimes you have to hurt things to see how they work." The moment Lily came back, she must have sensed the tension because she immediately asked if we could watch a movie. I agreed quickly, grateful for the distraction, and we moved to the living room. Lily sat pressed against my side on the couch while Ethan took the armchair across from us, never taking his eyes off me even as the movie played. About halfway through, I heard a sound from upstairs. A high-pitched squeak followed by a thump. "That's just Mr. Whiskers," Lily said quickly, but her whole body had gone rigid. "Our cat," she added when she saw my confusion. Ethan stood up slowly, that same inappropriate smile spreading across his face. "I should check on him," he said. "He hasn't been feeling well." Lily's fingers dug into my arm and she whispered, "Don't let him go up there alone." But Ethan was already heading for the stairs, and when I stood to follow, he turned and said in this perfectly calm voice, "I really think you should stay with Lily. She gets scared when she's alone." The way he said it wasn't a suggestion. I stayed with Lily for about 5 minutes before the sounds from upstairs got worse. A series of thuds, and then what sounded like the cat screaming. Lily was crying now, silent tears running down her face, and I'd had enough. I told her to stay on the couch and headed for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The hallway was dark, but I could see light coming from under a door at the end. When I pushed it open, I found Ethan in what must have been his parents' bedroom. Mr. Whiskers was on the bed, and Ethan was holding him down with one hand while holding something small and sharp in the other. It looked like a compass from a geometry set. The cat was struggling, and there were already several small red spots on its white fur. "Put him down," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Ethan looked up at me with those pale eyes, tilting his head like I was the one doing something strange. "I'm just conducting an experiment," he said. "Don't you want to know how much pressure it takes before they stop moving?" I stepped forward and grabbed the cat, who immediately scratched my arms in panic before running out of the room. Ethan stood up slowly, still holding the compass, and for the first time I felt genuinely afraid of a 9-year-old child. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, walking toward me with measured steps. "Now the experiment is ruined. We'll have to start over with something else." I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on him, but he moved faster than I expected, darting forward and catching my wrist. His grip was shockingly strong, and when he pressed the compass point against my palm, just enough to indent the skin, he watched my face with scientific curiosity. "Does this hurt?" he asked. "Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. I yanked my hand away and pushed past him, heading back downstairs where Lily was still curled up on the couch. My mind was racing. Should I call the parents, the police? This kid clearly needed serious help, but what would I even say? That a 9-year-old was creeping me out? I decided to call Mrs. Wayne, but when I picked up my phone, I realized it wasn't where I'd left it on the kitchen counter. "Looking for this?" Ethan's voice came from behind me. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs holding my phone. "I think we should play a game first." "Lily loves games, don't you, Lily?" His sister shrank further into the couch cushions, and I knew this was about to get much worse. "Give me my phone, Ethan," I said, trying to sound authoritative despite my racing heart. He tossed it in the air and caught it, then suddenly threw it hard against the wall where it shattered into pieces. The sound made Lily whimper. "Oops," he said flatly. "Guess you can't call anyone now." He walked into the kitchen, and I heard drawers opening and closing. When he came back, he was carrying the knife from earlier, the one he'd been examining before dinner. "Did you know that the human body has about 37 trillion cells?" he said conversationally, running his finger along the flat of the blade. "I read that each one dies and regenerates at different rates. Skin cells last about 2 weeks. Red blood cells last 4 months. But brain cells, some of those last your whole lifetime, unless something happens to them." He took a step toward us and I pulled Lily behind me. "We're leaving," I said, grabbing Lily's hand and moving toward the front door, but Ethan was quick, positioning himself between us and the exit. "The game isn't over yet," he said, "and nobody leaves until I say so." That's when Lily did something I didn't expect. She bit Ethan's arm hard enough to make him drop the knife. "Run!" she screamed, and we bolted toward the back door in the kitchen. I could hear Ethan behind us, not running but walking with those same measured steps, like he knew we couldn't really escape. The back door was locked with a deadbolt that needed a key from the inside. Mrs. Wayne hadn't shown me where they kept it. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing his arm where Lily had bitten him. "That really hurt, Lily," he said calmly. "You know what happens when you hurt me?" Lily was sobbing now, pressing herself against the door. I grabbed a chair and held it between us and Ethan like a shield. "The Brenners next door," Lily whispered to me. "They have a key. Their backyard connects to ours through the gate." Ethan heard her and shook his head slowly. "You're not supposed to tell secrets, Lily. Now I'll have to punish both of you." He picked up the knife from where it had fallen, and I made a decision. I threw the chair at him as hard as I could, grabbed Lily, and ran for the sliding glass door in the dining room. The glass door was unlocked, thank God, and we burst into the backyard just as I heard the chair crash behind us. The Waynes' backyard was huge and dark, with a pool covered for the season, and garden beds along the fence. Lily pointed to a gate in the far corner, barely visible in the moonlight, and we ran toward it, my bare feet slipping on the wet grass. Behind us, the sliding door opened with a soft whoosh. "You can't run forever," Ethan called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "And when I catch you, we're going to play a different game. One where Lily gets to watch what happens when you don't follow the rules." The gate was locked with a simple latch that I fumbled with in the darkness, my fingers numb with fear. Finally, it clicked open and we stumbled into the Brenners' yard. Their house was lit up like a Christmas tree, every window glowing, and I could see someone moving in the kitchen. We ran to their back door and I pounded on it with both fists, probably looking insane. A college girl with scratched arms and no shoes, dragging a crying 7-year-old. Mrs. Brenner opened the door, an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun, and her eyes went wide when she saw us. "Call 911, I gasped out. "Please, just call 911 now." She didn't hesitate, immediately grabbing her phone from the counter while ushering us inside. Mr. Brenner appeared from the living room, and when I told them Ethan was dangerous and had a knife, his face went pale. "We've been worried about that boy," he said quietly. "Found our dog last month." "Never mind. Martha, tell them to hurry." We could see the Waynes' backyard from their kitchen window, and Ethan was standing by the gate, still holding the knife, just staring at the Brenners' house. He didn't try to come through the gate, just stood there watching. And somehow that was more terrifying than if he'd chased us. The police arrived within 10 minutes, the longest 10 minutes of my life, and 2 officers went to the Waynes' house while 1 stayed to take our statements. Lily finally told them everything, how Ethan had been hurting her for months, killing neighborhood pets, threatening her if she told anyone. She showed them older scars I hadn't noticed before, neat little cuts on her legs that he'd made her hide with long pants. The parents came home about an hour later to find police cars and an ambulance in their driveway. Mrs. Wayne broke down completely when the officers told her what had happened, but Mr. Wayne just stood there, with this hollow look, like he'd been expecting this call his whole life. Ethan was taken for psychiatric evaluation that night. I later learned from Mrs. Johnson, the family who'd recommended me, that he'd been diagnosed with conduct disorder and possible antisocial personality disorder. Fancy terms for what everyone in that neighborhood now knew was a deeply disturbed child who'd been escalating for years. The Waynes moved away 3 months later, but I kept in touch with the officer who'd taken my statement. He told me Ethan was placed in a specialized residential treatment facility after they found journals in his room documenting everything he'd done to animals and his plans for bigger experiments. Lily went to live with her grandmother in another state while her parents dealt with the legal and medical fallout. She sent me a letter once, about a year later, thanking me for getting her out that night. She said she was doing better, making friends, and didn't have to lock her bedroom door anymore. I never babysat again after that night. I work in an office now. Nice boring data entry where the worst thing that happens is the printer jams. Sometimes I still think about Ethan's pale eyes and that clinical curiosity in his voice when he asked me to rate my pain. But mostly I think about Lily, hoping she's somewhere safe, finally able to be just a normal kid who doesn't have to live in fear of her own brother. Last winter, I was between jobs when my sister Laura asked if I could watch her boys for a week while she attended a conference in Phoenix. I just finished my teaching degree but hadn't landed a position yet, so the timing worked out perfectly. Her twins, Mason and Lucas, were 12 years old, and I figured it would be easy money. Just make sure they ate dinner, did their homework, and got to bed on time. Laura's house sat at the end of Pinewood Avenue, one of those quiet suburban streets where nothing ever happens, where the biggest drama is usually someone's lawn getting too tall. The boys had always been a little odd, quieter than most kids their age, but I chalked it up to them being bookish types who preferred screens to sports. They had this way of staring at you without blinking for just a beat too long, and they'd often finish each other's sentences in a way that made you wonder if they practiced their conversations beforehand. The first few days went smoothly enough, though I noticed they spent every free moment huddled together on the couch with their tablets, earbuds in, completely absorbed in whatever they were watching. When I asked what had them so captivated, Mason looked up with these bright, eager eyes and said they were learning about real investigations and how crimes actually work. Lucas chimed in that their science teacher had gotten them interested in forensics, and now they were watching everything they could find about famous cases and criminal psychology. At dinner, instead of talking about video games or school friends like normal kids, they'd discuss blood spatter patterns and how long it takes for bruises to form on different skin types. They knew details about cases I'd never even heard of, obscure murders from the 1970s, techniques used by serial killers to avoid detection, how investigators sometimes missed crucial evidence. The way they talked about violence was clinical, detached, like they were discussing the rules of chess rather than actual human suffering. On the fourth night, a Tuesday, I caught them in the garage after bedtime, examining Laura's tool collection with flashlights. Mason was holding a length of rope, while Lucas measured it against his own height, muttering numbers under his breath. When I flicked on the overhead light, they didn't even startle, just turned to look at me with those unnervingly calm expressions. "We're doing a project," Lucas explained, wrapping the rope into neat loops like he'd practiced the motion 100 times. "About knots and their tensile strength." Mason added that they'd learned about different binding techniques used throughout history, how certain knots were impossible to escape from if done correctly. They showed me a notebook filled with detailed sketches of various knot patterns, complete with annotations about pounds of pressure and circulation cutoff times. Something about the precision of their drawings, The methodical way they documented each configuration made my chest feel tight. That same night, after I'd sent them back to their rooms, I found their browser history on the family computer. Page after page of true crime forums, autopsy reports that should have been behind age restrictions, detailed discussions about how long a person could survive without oxygen, water, food. They'd bookmarked a thread titled, "Mistakes That Got Them Caught," with over 300 replies analyzing where criminals had gone wrong. One tab was still open to a video transcript of a killer describing exactly how he'd subdued his victims, step by step, like a cooking recipe. The boys had left comments under fake usernames, asking specific questions about restraint methods and how to prevent someone from screaming. User Twin Study 1 had written, "But wouldn't duct tape leave residue? What about using cloth instead?" The response from another user explained exactly how to muffle sound without leaving forensic evidence. My mouth went dry reading their exchanges, seeing how other users praised their thorough research and attention to detail. I should have called Laura right then, should have packed my things and left, but I kept telling myself they were just curious kids with a morbid fascination. Lots of people watch true crime shows, right? The next morning, Wednesday, they seemed completely normal at breakfast, talking about a math test and asking if we could order pizza for dinner. Mason even smiled when I agreed, a genuine kid smile that made me doubt everything I'd seen the night before. But throughout the day, I kept catching these moments. Lucas timing how long it took me to get from the kitchen to the front door, Mason testing which floorboards creaked in the hallway, both of them watching me when they thought I wasn't looking. After lunch, I found them in the basement with Laura's old camcorder, filming each other practice approaching someone from behind. "It's for a school presentation," Lucas said when I asked, but their teacher had sent home a newsletter that week, and there was nothing about any presentations. By Wednesday evening, the atmosphere in the house had shifted into something I can't quite describe, like the air before a thunderstorm, charged and heavy. The boys kept exchanging these meaningful looks across the dinner table, and I noticed they'd barely touched their pizza, despite specifically requesting it. Around 8 o'clock, Mason asked if I wanted to watch a movie with them. Something about his voice too eager, too rehearsed. Lucas was already setting up the living room, moving the coffee table aside to create more floor space, positioning the couch cushions in a specific arrangement that seemed oddly deliberate. They'd closed all the curtains even though it was still light outside, and I saw Lucas slip something into his pocket when he thought I was looking at the TV. The movie they'd chosen was some obscure thriller about a home invasion, and they kept pausing it to discuss the techniques the criminals were using, asking me what I would do in that situation, how I would try to escape. About halfway through the movie, Lucas said he was cold and went to get blankets. Mason stayed unnaturally still beside me, his breathing deliberately steady like he was counting each inhale and exhale. When Lucas returned, he had an armful of sheets and blankets, way more than we needed, and that rope from the garage tucked underneath. Before I could react, Mason grabbed my wrists with surprising strength while Lucas threw a sheet over my head. The coordination was perfect. They'd clearly rehearsed this. I tried to stand, but Mason hooked his leg behind my knees, a move he must have seen in one of those videos, and I went down hard on the carpet. Lucas was already wrapping the rope around my ankles with those precise knots he'd been practicing, talking to Mason in this calm, instructional voice. "Remember, 3 loops minimum, just like the forum said." My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst as I felt them securing my wrists behind my back with what felt like zip ties they'd hidden in the couch cushions. The sheet came off my head once they had me restrained, and I saw they'd lit dozens of candles around the room. When had they even done that? The flickering light made their faces look older, sharper, and they were both wearing latex gloves they must have taken from under the kitchen sink. Mason had a notebook in his hand, reading from it like a script. Subject appears distressed, pulse visibly elevated in carotid artery, initial restraints holding as expected. Lucas was setting up the camcorder on a tripod, adjusting the angle to capture everything. They weren't playing anymore. This was methodical, systematic, like they were conducting an actual experiment with me as their test subject. We read that fear responses peak within the first 15 minutes, Lucas explained, pulling out a kitchen timer and setting it on the mantel. We want to document the physiological changes, pupil dilation, perspiration, vocal patterns. Mason approached with a flashlight, shining it directly in my eyes while Lucas took notes about my reaction. The smell of all those candles was overwhelming, vanilla and cinnamon mixing into something that made me nauseous. When I tried to scream, they didn't panic or rush to silence me like you'd expect from kids who'd gotten in over their heads. Instead, Lucas calmly checked his watch and made a note. Vocalization attempt at minute 3. Volume approximately 70 decibels based on our prior measurements. Mason pulled out an iPad and showed me a sound meter app they'd been using to test how far screams could travel from inside the house. The Petersons next door can't hear anything under 85 decibels, he informed me matter-of-factly. We tested it last weekend when they were home. They'd thought of everything, researched everything, prepared for every contingency like tiny criminal masterminds. Lucas produced a ball of cloth, one of my own socks, I realized, and held it near my face. Phase 2 involves testing gag effectiveness, he announced to the camera. We've compared different materials and insertion methods based on emergency room data about choking hazards. The clinical way he said it, like he was presenting a science fair project, made bile rise in my throat. They spent the next hour running through what they called their protocol, taking turns reading from their notebooks and making adjustments to my restraints. Every few minutes, they'd stop to take my pulse, checking it against some chart they'd printed from a medical website. Mason had brought down a blood pressure cuff from Laura's bathroom and was trying to figure out how to use it properly, while Lucas critiqued his technique based on a YouTube tutorial they'd watched. They documented everything: how long it took for the zip ties to leave marks, which positions caused the most discomfort, how my breathing changed when they tightened certain knots. At one point, Lucas mentioned they'd found a website that explained how crime scene investigators could determine the timeline of events based on bruising patterns and ligature marks. We're being careful not to cause permanent damage, he assured the camera, as if that somehow made this better. The kitchen timer kept going off every 15 minutes, and they'd reset it and move to the next phase of whatever sick experiment they were conducting. One of the candles near the window had burned down dangerously low, wax pooling on the wooden side table Laura had inherited from her grandmother. The boys were so focused on their research that they didn't notice when that candle finally tipped over, the pooled wax catching the lace doily underneath. The flame spread to the curtain's edge while Mason was busy adjusting the camera angle, and Lucas was writing observations about my stress indicators. It wasn't until smoke started filling the room that they looked up from their notebooks, and I saw real panic flash across their faces for the first time all night. The smoke detector started shrieking just as Lucas tried to stamp out the growing fire with a couch cushion, which only made things worse. Mason ran to the kitchen for water but knocked over 3 more candles in his rush, and suddenly the room was chaos. Smoke everywhere, multiple small fires starting, the boys coughing and stumbling over their equipment. Through the window, I could see lights turning on at the Petersons' house, then the Ngoyans across the street. The twins were trying to untie me when we heard the sirens, their practiced calm completely shattered as they fumbled with the knots they'd so carefully crafted. Lucas was crying, saying, "We didn't mean for this part to happen," over and over, while Mason tried to cut the zip ties with safety scissors that weren't strong enough. The firefighters broke down the door just as the boys managed to get the rope off my ankles. I'll never forget the look on the lead firefighter's face when he took in the scene. Me still partially tied up, the camera on its tripod, the notebooks full of their observations scattered on the floor, and these 2 12-year-old boys in latex gloves standing over me with scissors. The police arrived minutes later, and while the paramedics checked me over, I watched the officers flip through those notebooks, their expressions growing more disturbed with each page. The boys kept trying to explain that it was just research, that they were going to let me go after they collected enough data, that they'd calculated everything to be safe within acceptable parameters. The officer who took my statement, A woman named Detective Ramirez told me they'd found over 40 hours of true crime content on the boys' devices, plus correspondence with adult users on those forums who'd been encouraging their curiosity. Laura had to fly home that night, and I spent 3 hours at the hospital getting photographed and examined, while she sobbed in the waiting room. The boys ended up in a psychiatric facility for evaluation, and the last I heard, they were in intensive therapy. I still have scars on my wrists from those zip ties, thin white lines that remind me how close I came to being a statistic in someone else's true crime obsession.